Infinite Possibilities Part 3. It's about our emotions. Last time, we talked about how our beliefs affect our thoughts, which affect our experiences, which affect our beliefs, that reinforces our beliefs. We have this circle of activity that plays out in our lives. It creates our lives, actually, because our thoughts become things. Our beliefs inform our thoughts, our words, and our actions. Oftentimes, we are not even aware of the underlying subconscious beliefs that are running our lives. So this week, we're going to expand the idea further to include our emotions. And for our lesson today, we're talking about emotions as our reactions to the events and circumstances of our lives, ranging from happiness all the way to grief. Emotions are filtered through our beliefs, which are different from our feelings. Later, we'll discuss feelings, which come from the spiritual aspects of ourselves, expressed as intuition, hunches, gut feelings, or insights that help us direct our lives for our highest good. These are not reactions to the earthly realm. They are inspiration from the celestial realm. So back to emotions. Emotions are one of life's greatest gifts. There's a feedback system for our life experience. Pleasant ones let us know we're moving along harmoniously. Unpleasant ones give us an opportunity to learn and grow by looking at our thinking, which can direct us to our underlying beliefs. Our emotions are the products of our beliefs and perceptions. We've already discussed the power of our belief systems. We did that last time. So now we're going to move to how our perceptions affect our life experience. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of perceive is to attain awareness or understanding, to become aware through the senses. The definition of perception is a mental image, concept, physical sensation interpreted in the light of experience, or a capacity for comprehension. So how then do our perceptions affect our emotions? Well, firstly, our perceptions come from our beliefs. Notice that these definitions address the senses, which are an information system for our human experience. Perceive, to come aware through the senses. Remember that beliefs affect our thoughts, which create our life, and our life experiences, which perpetuate our beliefs. Within this circle of activity, perception emerges. Perception, the physical sensation interpreted in the light of experience. Our perceptions spring from our beliefs becoming thoughts, and are further formed in the life experience part of this circle. This circle that can spiral upwards or spiral downwards, deciding upon the thoughts we choose. So our beliefs come first, shaping our perceptions. Then our perceptions create and fuel our emotions. Our perceptions can be just as invisible as those underlying belief systems that live, a lot of them, in our subconscious. They come to us early on from the training in our families of origin, and then they're expanded through our life experiences. So our beliefs give rise to the emotions just as our beliefs give rise to thoughts. For example, here's an idea of a belief. Every day brings new opportunities. I am a beloved child of the universe. So your perception is, I feel blessed. Life is easy. God is good. And a typical emotion might be inspired, motivated, happy. Here's another belief. Life is about the survival of the fittest. Opportunity only knocks once. No one succeeds without luck. Well, the perception coming from that belief might be nothing I will do will guarantee my success or happiness. The cards of life are stacked against me. And a typical emotion might be depressed or sad or hopeless. So that's an example of how an underlying belief, which you may consciously or unconsciously have, will affect your perception, which will manifest itself in an emotion in your life experience. And emotions, they're energy in motion. So emotions perpetuate themselves. We must be aware of our negative thoughts and emotions. Just as our thoughts become things, so do our emotions perpetuate themselves. And they can create, again, a downward spiral or an upward one. So it's important that we have an awareness of what our emotions are and how we feel. And can we change how we feel? Let me say that in our New Thought movement and metaphysical thinkers, I'm going to speak about myself right now. I trained 13 years to become a Christian Science practitioner, from the time that I was in Unity, from when I first stepped into Christian Science into when I completed my training and had enough healings to become a journalistic practitioner. So in those 13 years, I was obviously on what I would like to think about an upward path, right? An upward spiral, working, studying, being blessed to work with people through challenges and physical challenges as well as emotional and all of that. And what I found was that I would do what I call a spiritual bypass, usually with myself, not with someone I was working with. So if I had an emotion that I didn't like too much, I would just put myself right in that. I wouldn't work through it. I would put myself in that place above it. And I found that over time, these emotions that I didn't want to admit that I had got stuck in me. I didn't process them as they came along. I just did a spiritual bypass and right over them. Because let's face it, metaphysical thinkers know how to do that, right? We know how to claim that we are a child of God. We know how to claim that we're eternal beings. We know how to affirm. We are brilliant with affirmations, right? And we know how to use them. Well, sometimes we just have to take the human footsteps through that stuff. And I found that I had to, and I'm going to use the term get back in my body, if I may, that I had to get back into my human experience more and not perform this spiritual bypass when I had emotions come into my experience that I didn't think I should have, right? So when we have these emotions, they're signposts. It's a feedback system. And it's a feedback system that helps us, if we're willing to be mindful and aware and see where we are with this information, we can take a look at, well, why am I thinking that? Why am I feeling that? And what is my thought behind that feeling? And what is my perception that created that thought? And then, if I even choose to go further, what's the underlying belief that fed that perception that helped create this emotion? Okay, so it's thoughts and perceptions are kind of parallel to each other right here, and that feed into the emotions. The way that I like to think about, I think of a thought most of the time as us consciously choosing a thought, whereas a perception, again, is kind of an underlying aspect of ourselves that we don't often question, and sometimes we don't even realize that we have a perception, or we're looking through that lens of prejudice, or that lens of lack, or that lens of incompetence or fear. We all look through those lenses sometimes. So how about changing how we feel? So what I did was I just tried to leapfrog over it, how I felt. Instead of accepting it, realizing that an emotion might be very uncomfortable, yet it was bringing information to me. So Mike Dooley in Infinite Possibilities likes to say, joy is only ever a few thoughts away. And I'm a firm believer in that, because I believe that joy is our original energy with which we enter the planet. I've had the pleasure of birthing 2 children and being present for the birth of 2 more. And I can say that energy read is just pure joy. And I of course, I experienced that as a grandparent, as a parent and a grandparent. But what I can say is when you feel that energy of that pure baby, that new soul that has just entered, it is one of joy. Right? Joy and peace. There's none of that other human stuff wrapped around it. It's beautiful. So, joy is only a few thoughts away, because I'm telling you, it's your natural state. So now, emotions that are unpleasant can serve to open our hearts to deeper understanding and greater life truths. So the good news is we are not at the mercy of our emotions. We can look at our beliefs and perceptions to see what is creating our emotions. And perceptions are usually easier to spot than the underlying beliefs. So let's start with examining our perceptions. And we're going to use a life example as to how we can change a perception. So for you, each of you, I want you to start by thinking of one of the greatest challenges in your life. And whatever comes in, the first and the worst is it. Just hang on to that thought. For me, it was my brother's death at age 21 in a car accident. Now, and this is something in your past. Now I want you to think, what is a related gift to that challenge? You now have the gift of time and space to look back over it. So I want you to think of a gift that was related to you walking through that challenge. My gift was understanding the eternal aspect of life, learning that I can communicate with those on the other side. Actually, all of us can. So what about a challenge you have today? Let's think about a challenge you have today. And what if we started with the understanding that that challenge ultimately is bringing a gift? Because all of a sudden we're looking for the gift. Or at least we're willing to realize there's a possibility of a gift. Remember, I'm willing to be willing. We talked about that before. Sometimes it's the willingness, and if we aren't even willing yet, we can be willing to change a thought, to change a belief. So if you're willing to be willing to change your perception, you have opened that space for change. So if you knew a gift was coming, so come back to that current challenge. First of all, let's take a moment to be grateful for that challenge in your past. Let's just honor that and be grateful. And now let's come back to the challenge that's currently in your life. And would you be willing to say, there is a gift that will be wrapped up somehow in this challenge or this pain? Because when you're willing to do that, you have just changed your perception. Can you see how looking through that glass of willingness all of a sudden changes the energy around that challenge? Michael Meerdad has written a wonderful book he calls You're Not Going Crazy, You're Just Waking Up. It's okay, you're not, and he talks about a dark journey of the night, the long journey of the soul. What's the right word for that? Dark night of the soul. Thank you. I've heard him give that talk 3 times. Dark night of the soul. And he says, you can walk through the darkness like this, or you can open up your eyes and look through and grow from it and know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I really like his work about that, so that's a book I recommend. It's a real quick read and it's lovely. Michael Meerdad. So, changing our perceptions. So we talked about thinking of a present challenge. Now, what we need to do is change, what we can do is change the belief that causes that unpleasant emotion. And Mike actually has this question and answer in his book. He says, what causes all emotions? And he says, our beliefs. And then he says, what causes unpleasant emotions? And he says, limiting beliefs that create errors in our perception. So if you think about it that way, that our limiting beliefs are creating errors in our perception, that gives us an opportunity to change our perception, whether we know what the limiting belief is or not. So belief, and of course a limiting belief might be, I'm unworthy, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm too fat, I'm too tall, I don't have enough education, whatever that looks like. People are mean, right? Any of that sort of stuff. And through all of those kinds of thoughts, you eventually create emotions of sadness or anger or depression or hopelessness. Because we can see how the thoughts, right, the belief, the underlying belief, and then your perception is dark, and then your experience is dark. You know, the whole like attracts like thing? So all of that darker, heavier energy creates this downward spiral, and your emotions perpetuate themselves. So what if we choose to think instead, my belief is I'm a spiritual being, loved, eternal, guided, protected, right? Now you see life's beauty, and looking through that thought and this lens of life, it's hard to maintain sadness, depression, anger, right? Because when you're thinking those kind of thoughts, those create your experience, right? Create your perception, create your experience, creates the emotion, and the emotion perpetuates itself, and your life experiences. You have this beautiful upward spiral. And I like to think of it in terms, since I'm an energy practitioner, I like to think of energy in terms of lighter and heavier, more so than light and dark, because it's a heavier emotion and it's a lighter emotion, right? The frequency is higher, the vibration is higher, and it moves upward and outward all the way. You know how I love to say we live and move and have our being in this energy that is God, that is the universe, and we all coexist and we're all created from the same source energy. So let's let truth come into this conversation. Let the light of truth shine on your beliefs so you can be set free from their limitations. You know what? I was going to read this at the end, but I'm being led to read it right now. So this is what I was going to close with, except right now is when it's supposed to happen. From our beloved Ernest Holmes, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." That's John 8:31. Jesus implies that there is a truth which, known automatically, will demonstrate itself in our experience. What could this truth be other than a consciousness of our union with life? It is wonderful to contemplate this spiritual and exalted idea of truth, that truth which frees us from the tyranny of fear and the thraldom of hate, of fate, and might I add, our prison of limited beliefs. It is neither in our stars nor in our environment that we should look to discover this pattern of truth. The truth that Jesus proclaimed would make us free lies only in the conscious communion of the soul with its source. The conscious union of each individual with God. The conscious union of the heart's desire with the source of its being. Today, I commune with the spiritual truth in everything. Today, I know that the truth makes me free from fear, doubt, or uncertainty. Today, there is a song in my heart as I gladly proclaim that truth, which is the revelation of divinity through humanity. So that truth, what we're going to do is we are now going to compare negative emotions to that truth, because that is the truth that sets us free. So a negative emotion might be anger. A limiting belief behind that might be that others have control over me. And the truth, or empowering belief, my thoughts shape my life. I have options. With patience and determination, I can change my circumstance. Wow, what a difference is that empowering belief and perception from the one that is controlling and limiting. Sadness. Some things just can't be changed. What about the empowering belief? While the past is history, I choose my future. I have the rest of my life before me. That is the truth. That is the truth to which he speaks. That is the truth of being. How about another one? Guilt. The negative emotion is guilt, but the limiting belief is I may never be forgiven. The empowering belief is every holy book and your own compassion evidence that everyone deserves another chance and that I am still loved and important. That's the truth. You are all students of unity. You understand the power of truth and how it manifests in our lives. You know that you can ask, what is the truth in this situation? And you will receive your answer. In this, I actually brought my workbook for when I first did this Infinite Possibilities course, because he talks about, well, he actually has an entire section here in this emotions chapter where he talks about the big picture and understanding your emotions. So what I would like to talk about here, and I brought this just because I wanted to give my thoughts as they came out the first time I did this. I've done it so many times now. I'm afraid it would sound manufactured, so I want to be able to actually read my first reactions to this. So Mike talks about experiencing emotional pain is a great way, again, this feedback system, it's a great way for us to choose. We can choose to stay in the pain, or we can choose to grow from it. So here he wants to talk about understanding the truth of emotions. And the first one that he brings up is hate. So he says, hate among strangers isn't hate. It's either fear or anger. And hate among friends is the reflection of an emotional love that had conditions that weren't met. And I think that's a lovely way to look at that. So then he asks, when have you felt hate? And when I feel hate is with injustice. I used to hate man's inhumanity to man, and bullying, and male dominance, what they do to women. This was written a long time ago, not just in the wake of what's happened in our news recently. And corruption, any kind of corruption anywhere. So that's what made me feel hate. And let me say about that I raised my children that hate was a word that could only be used once. When that emotion came up for them, they were allowed to say, oh, I hate that, or I hate this person. And then we immediately had to go to what was underlying the hate. So what I have here for my bigger and the more spiritual thoughts, so what Mike asks you to do is look for the truth. What are the bigger and more spiritual thoughts behind these things that caused me to feel hate? And so one of the things I said with the injustice is that these aspects of human behavior are a part of the Playhouse Earth experience. Eternal souls journey here to live out the drama for their soul expansion. Now, is that a spiritual bypass? Maybe. Except it sure makes me not judge someone else. It sure makes me, I don't know what experience they came here to learn, or what lessons, or what their journey is about. I just know that I don't get to choose hate for them for what they're choosing to do. And then when I have here this bullying part, raising my children, I was very deliberate in teaching them about certain emotions. Hate is one of them. They weren't allowed to use the word past the original emotional outburst. They had to go deeper to explain why they felt hate, to understand how to move through it. We never stayed in hate. And I can remember teaching them that love was on one side of the coin and hate was on the other side, and they couldn't understand that. If they were talking about hate in that way, that it was not the opposite of love, that it was the same coin, that the opposite of love is fear, not hate, that you have to really care about somebody to have that strong of an emotion to respond to that. So that's one way that we can look at hate through that lens of truth. He talks about sadness and depression. He talks about anger. He talks about grief. This one about grief, I think, is really important because Mike talks, I'm going to use his words here. Grief is perhaps the darkest of feelings sparked from a loss, perhaps due to a death. Yet it's an emotion that everyone faces and must overcome. Allowing yourself to feel grief is part of the healing. Afterwards, however, there needs to be a real effort to get back into the swing of things. Grief, like all unpleasant emotions, arises out of limiting beliefs that tell you your loss is permanent and forever. But as an eternal spiritual being, you should be able to grasp that no loss is ever permanent. So I like it that he goes to grief, because that's the one emotion that we're like, well, what do you mean I can change that? Well, by living through it, by walking through it, and by having that truth, the truth that Jesus would proclaim, knock and the truth will set you free. The truth is that we are eternal beings. And that when we can get ourselves to that place, to me, it means that in our human experience, in this incarnation, in this journey that we've chosen now, that grief is a huge part of our experience. And yet, if I'm willing to keep my eyes open and my heart open, and I'm willing, that I can grow from it and I can walk through it. And I believe we can do that with grace and dignity too. I really believe that. When we know that we're eternal beings and that the person we have lost is an eternal being as well, that connection is forever and always available. I happen to believe that too. You know, and we can have grief over the loss of a job or a career or a relationship. And that's all very meaningful. And it gives us an opportunity, once we're through enough of the harshness, the really painful part of the grief, and we have this willingness to open up and to look at, why am I perceiving this with so much grief? Then we can take a look at our perception, and baby step by baby step we can walk through it. And we can either release that perception, we can change it, or we can have it lead us all the way back to that limiting belief that no longer serves us. I have a daily prayer that I release any beliefs that no longer serve me. And I know I said that last time, and I just want to make that a reminder that we can always have an awareness that we're willing to release what no longer serves us. And I find, and let me, with the caveat that, whoa, I have things present in my experience that maybe wouldn't be considered pleasant by a lot of people. However, they give me this opportunity to look it right in the face. Another one of my false beliefs or limiting beliefs. I have a life experience present that's pretty darn humiliating or embarrassing, or to a lot of people would be make them really sad, but I choose to look at it in a way that I can grow from it. And oftentimes when I get to the perception, I almost find that it's laughable. I mean, and I don't mean to lessen this, but usually I get to laugh at myself because it's me that's been embarrassed or humiliated. So I really encourage you to stay aware and mindful of especially when you have a reaction to something, because usually I find that when I'm releasing a limiting belief, something has come out of my mouth that I just can't even believe I said. And it's always such a shock when that happens. And yet I know, and I immediately apologize to whomever I spoke it to. And then I say, I'm going to take a look at that. I have some kind of limiting belief underneath that doesn't serve me. And you know what? I find that when I take full responsibility for that, the apology is accepted, and pretty much, and the healing has begun. Right? Certainly with the person that I spoke it to, and then certainly, and usually it's complete there, and then it has begun in my experience. So when we're working, and we go through guilt, and then we get to happiness. Now let's talk about that. Those pleasant emotions mean that we're getting there, right? If we don't have to change those. The pleasant emotions mean that we are doing it. We're working through it. That we have an experience that is beneficial. Right? Because if we have pleasant emotions, that's the energy that we're bringing to the planet. That's the energy that's exuding from us. And I believe that those emotions of peace and happiness, peace and happiness, and I think those lead up to joy, that when we bring that in our experience and we exude those emotions, it literally raises the vibration around us. And I know I've said this, I've probably said this each time, my goal is to raise the collective consciousness to a place of peaceful coexistence. So the more that we can do exuding peace, choosing peace, and releasing these old perceptions and these old beliefs that no longer serve us, the more pleasant our life will be, and honestly, the better the world will be. So I encourage you to take a look at all of that. And remember about, I'm going to wrap up with, because this was how I was going to wrap it up. I want to go back to, Jesus implies that there is a truth which known automatically will demonstrate itself in our experience. What could this truth be other than a consciousness of our union with life? It is wonderful to contemplate the spiritual and exalted idea of truth, that truth which frees us from the tyranny of fear, the thraldom of fate, and the prison of our limiting beliefs. Thank you.
Let's just close our eyes and take a deep breath. And relax into the awareness that right where you are is the presence and power of divine awareness. That image and likeness of God that we all demonstrate. When we are in that consciousness, that we can see, feel, and believe that we're all one. We've healed that sense of separation. We can let our higher self become one with those that is seeking a way to lift their consciousness. We become a magnet for those that is seeking the love, the acceptance, the tolerance, the need that they have to be uplifted and restored. And Father, Mother God, as we move through this awareness that we're all one in spirit, mind, body, and soul, there's only one, the Christ, active within each and every one of us. We can feel it. We can have our being within this. It brings harmony, peace, and prosperity. And for this we are indeed grateful. And so it is. Amen.